1950s Minnesota was a quiet place. Aside from moms yelling for their kids to come home for dinner, and in one instance, a cat, there was little loud talk in my Minneapolis neighborhood.
Hello, kids, I never expected this. It looks like Cecil B. DeMille directed this. I'm really thrilled to see this crowd. It makes a guy feel mighty proud.
People on television were different, though. Loudmouth New Yorkers, Sid Caesar, Imogen Coca, Milton Berle, known then as Mr. Television.
But what I've got is better still. I've got, what do you got, my fans?
Their roots were the vaudeville stage, where men wore baggy pants and jokes, some highly inappropriate, were hollered to the rafters. They were very un-Minnesota.
What do you got, my fans?
Several nights a week, I gathered with my mom and dad in front of a mahogany Emerson TV console, the centerpiece of our living room, and marveled at this miracle called television. I didn't understand the loud, fast, sometimes sophisticated shtick. Don't think my parents did either, even though I thought Burl, who sometimes wore lipstick and dressed in drag, was funny for that very reason. I was too young to understand the jokes, the double entendres, but it was noisy and raucous, and I laughed along with their live audiences.
Well, Hollywood is okay. It's got Clark Gable, Betty Grable, Walter Abel, Warner Stable, write a fable, if you're able, and you're Babel, wear a sable, movie divorces quick, divorces quick, divorces quick, and Marilyn Monroe. I got a joke right here would close the network.
From Hollywood, the one, the only Lawrence Welk and his champagne music. Presented by Dodge and your neighborhood Dodge dealer.
But in 1955, our living room became quiet in a very strange way. The loud, fast talkers were muffled by a guy with a German accent from North Dakota whose musical signatures were schmaltzy polka music and bubbles floating through an orchestra. Among other things, Lawrence Welk's show flogged a vitamin supplement called Geritol and a laxative called Seritan. That's nature spelled backwards. A middle America obsessed by the need for a daily bowel movement loved the bouncy, bland bandmaster who began every song by lifting his baton, bouncing on his heels, and saying,
1 and 2 and...
TV bosses discovered that targeting America's heartland made good business sense, that there was a huge market in quieter people. Welk looked like the grocer near my grammar school who taped pennies underneath his glass counter and with a fat stick swatted the little hands that tried to steal them. Kind of a strange way, Lawrence Welk turned me onto a much smaller brown box, the radio. On nights when my parents watched the Champagne Music Maker, I trotted off to my room and warmed up my Bakelite AM radio. I can remember the smell of the dust frying on the vacuum tubes. Radio took me to faraway worlds, squeals and voices bouncing off the ionosphere and landing in my little box. 50,000-watt voices pouring in from New York and Chicago.
American Airlines greets you with music till dawn.
Some of the voices were like cream cheese. Jay Andres, who hosted American Airlines Music Till Dawn on WBBM in Chicago.
And so we began, you and I, and the flight was music through a beautiful fall night.
Enjoy the Hobbs House sound all the way through the night. You are more than welcome as a guest here in the music room.
Then there was Franklin Hobbs at WCCO in Minneapolis, who every night greeted the nation one city at a time, sometimes in rhyme.
Wednesday, January number 2. The old Farmer's Almanac says, days have lengthened one cock's stride.
Cedric Adams, with a voice that sounded like he gargled broken glass, was a legend where I grew up in the central U.S. When his 10 p.m. radio news ended, airline pilots said lights went out all over the Midwest. But Adams flopped on television. Many years later, I shared an office at a university with a former CBS television executive who had flown out to Minnesota to determine why. He said that while Adams sounded warm and friendly on the radio, he looked too elitist for a Midwestern audience. They didn't mind that he was rich, that he sometimes did his radio broadcasts from his yacht on a nearby lake. They couldn't see him. When they did, sitting behind a desk with fake leather-bound books behind him, they decided that Cedric was not one of them. Should have given the man an accordion. When I was 13, I met Adams on the street and bravely introduced myself. He invited me to join him in the studio for his broadcast. He gave me my own set of earphones. I became smitten by radio. My father was an immigrant Swede, spoke with a thick accent. In the 1940s, he owned a Model T Ford and a Piper Cub, which was regarded as the Model T of airplanes. His last job before me was navigating a troop ship between Africa and the coast of Italy during World War II. That was the last time he left the country. My mother made him promise not to fly again because you are now a father. I could see his pain when we made regular visits to the airport to watch planes take off and land. He trained me to pilot my own fantasy airplane as if it were an air guitar, going through the motions of steering and using the stick and throttle as we took off and landed and made up states and countries. My mother was a beauty. She was Minnesota's alfalfa queen. She rode afloat in the Minneapolis Aquatennial Parade with the Corn Queen and the Wheat Queen. Alfalfa was the major crop in her hometown of Thief River Falls, Minnesota. One year, townsfolk built an Arc de Triomphe out of the prized legume. My mom and the rest of her family escaped Thief River Falls on Minnesota's northern tundra. Dolled up in fur, she photographed like a movie star. She did visit Hollywood once, but did not stay. Worked as a secretary for perennial U.S. presidential candidate Harold Stassen, whom she called Meathead. Then she married my father and had me. My father, the navigator, knew the stars. He showed me the astronomical charts and mathematical tables he used to guide his ship. There was a wheat field in northern Minnesota, away from the pollution of streetlights, where he often took me to explore the skies. One night, we saw the ballet of the Aurora Borealis. He said the northern lights reminded him of the shelling he saw on the horizon as he navigated the Mediterranean. But on one clear night in 1957, we witnessed something that was not of nature. Not the fireflies dancing themselves into a mating frenzy, nor the planets or galaxies that held their marks like bet players, nor the shooting stars doing their swan songs. What we strained to see was a tiny speck moving across the horizon, a beach ball-sized sphere called Sputnik. I was too young to worry about the Russians in the Cold War and the notion that Sputnik could be a weapon of mass destruction. I was too young to have known of Jack Kerouac, who had just published On the Road, or The Howl of Allen Ginsberg. I didn't read Ginsberg until college, but I heard my mom joke about the beatniks. Beatnik, coined by San Francisco columnist Herb Caen, turned a cultural movement into a joke. But what I did see that night was that there was a world far beyond the grip of gravity and the borders of my neighborhood. Later, we turned on the shortwave radio. 20.002 megahertz was Sputnik's address on the dial. Its flea-powered transmitter, undoubtedly powered by enslaved Soviet fleas, bleeped through the static as it passed overhead. Radio became the window of my landlocked world.
This is Radio Moscow, and here is the news.
Listening to an oily Radio Moscow propagandist or a ham radio operator in the Congo crackling through the static allowed me to stray off to visions of giant missiles rolling through Red Square and flying monkeys. I later learned the Morse code and became a ham radio operator myself, staying up late into the night making contact with exotic places. I had papered my walk-in closet with National Geographic maps. Borneo, just below the hem of my raincoat, was a flat green space. No people, no trees, no snakes or orangutans living on this map. Just blue veins of rivers, and a few exotic names like Kota Kinabalu. Years later, I lay in the bow of a boat directly on the equator, puttering up a small tributary of the Mahakam River, a main artery of that flat green blob of the real Borneo. Fireflies, here called kelp-kelps, are again doing their number. Unlike the Minnesota cornfield, the constellations of both hemispheres stretch out before me. Like a monk, one tipsy on Indonesian beer, I search for metaphors, something profound to scratch on a scroll. Two worlds? Dumb. A left brain, right brain thing? Does one hemisphere calculate and the other dance? Why isn't Dusseldorf like Guadalajara? I ponder where I am, between two worlds, beneath many others. Why do the British walk the way they do? Why do the Thais drive the way they do? Why is there a Donald Duck statue in the square of a jungle town near here? And why does a local television station begin the day with a Muslim prayer and a Donald Duck cartoon? This was the real world, piquing more speculation and fantasy than any rant or squeal I had heard on the radio. I wanted to see, smell, hear, and feel it for myself.